Hey everyone, Kyle Bascombe here. Today we're going to be replacing the front brakes on this 2015 Mercedes C300. The procedure that we'll be performing today is going to be applicable to any C300 2015 and newer that does not have cross-drilled front brake rotors. So what I'm referring to is the solid face that you see on the rotors here. If you do have a cross-drilled rotor, we are going to have a different video for that specific brake setup. So what are the indicators that you're going to be looking out for to determine if you need to replace your front brakes? If you have the genuine or OE brake disc, there is a wear indicator right on the disc, and when it's worn past that spec and you can no longer see the indicator, you'll know that you need to replace the brakes. Some other common failure symptoms are going to be juddering that you feel through the brake pedal or at your fingertips when you're driving at higher speeds, or if you notice the brake performance just isn't good as it used to be, you could be dealing with an issue where the pads have glazed over and they're not performing very well. Today, we're replacing the front brake system on this vehicle because we recently purchased it. We noticed it has aftermarket components on it. We're not too comfortable with the quality of those, so that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to use our front brake kit that features genuine Mercedes rotors and TRW ceramic brake pads. What we're also doing to look out for you guys, the customers, is we are working with one of our suppliers to create a quality OE comparable disc that you can use so that you're not always relying on the genuine product. So in terms of a mileage interval for brake replacement, start taking a look at the condition of your brake pads and rotors at around 40,000 miles. Also, if your brake system is very noisy, or if you get the indicator on the dash that the brake pads require replacement, you're going to want to replace all of the components in your front brake system. These are the tools that you're going to need to complete this job. We have various wrenches in 1/2 inch, 3/8, and 1/4 inch drive. Our 1/2 inch drive tools we're using to remove the larger bolts, like the ones that retain the caliper bracket to the steering knuckle. So we use that and a 21mm socket. We have a shallow and deep socket that helped us out. And we also had a ratcheting wrench for the lower bolt. That saved us some time as well. We have a hanger so that you're hanging the caliper to an upper arm or a coil spring so that it's not dangling down and potentially damaging the brake hose. We have a soft bristle brush that we use to clean up the hub surfaces as well as the caliper bracket. We have this Lyle piston spreader so that we could retract the piston into the caliper. And then we also have our torque wrenches for when we were snugging things back up. We found a 3/8 inch drive useful for where the caliper body attaches to the bracket, and then we needed a much larger 1/2 inch drive for the large bolts that connect the bracket to the steering knuckle, and you're also going to use that when you're torquing the wheels after doing the brake job. Now that we've taken a look at the tools needed, let's get into this brake job. All right, so today we're going to be replacing brake rotor, brake pads. I'm going to start by removing the set screw that retains the rotor to the hub. Sometimes these things want to fight you a little bit, so I just want to get that out of the way first. To do so, I'm using a T30, just breaking it loose. If it does give you any trouble to break loose, you can always just send a screwdriver in here just as a counter hold if the rotor does spin, and that should be enough to allow you to break that loose. There we are. All right, next thing I'm going to do, I just want to walk the caliper ever so slightly away from the pad. So I'm just screwdriver in here against the bracket, just a little bit of medium pressure. That's enough for, can't see it too well in the shot, but it's giving me about a 1/2 mil of space to move and to work. All right, so I'm going to break this loose. What might happen is the nut behind it may begin to spin after I break it loose. If that's the case, I'm literally just going to take a pair of channel locks and put very light pressure on it to hold it in place. All right, so that one's loose. And so is that one. All right, the reason why I'm using these channel locks and applying a little bit of pressure is because if you use a typical wrench, it's going to be just a little bit too thick to fit in that area. So instead, ooh, a little clumsy this morning. So instead, I'm just counter holding with that. Just going to bring it back the rest of the way by hand. This is a factory bolt that's been reused maybe once or twice. You can see it has the blue thread locker on it. And then it looks as if maybe someone might have done a dab of thread locker again. Same thing up top. Light pressure on this guy. Spin this off. Then continue by hand. Just sliding that back. There we are. All right, that's out. This is going to get replaced when we replace the brake pads. All right, so now I am removing this screw that retains the sensor bracket. That's going to give me a little bit more room to hang my caliper. There we are, that's out. Just tack that back in so I don't forget where it goes. That gives me a little more room to maneuver my caliper. Just going to hang it right off the coil spring. There we go. Now it's safe. I don't have to worry about damaging the brake hose. And then we're just going to slide this pad out. Like I mentioned, it's a shame. This pad has, quite a lot of life left in it, but it is an aftermarket pad. We're not sure about the quality of it, and this car's been sitting for quite some time. So we're going to replace it with trusted brand, the TRW ceramic pads, and the genuine brake rotor. I'll take a moment before I remove the rotor to show you one of the differences between the genuine rotor and this aftermarket piece that's on here. Next thing we're going to do is remove the caliper bracket, which is retained by these two 21mm bolts. I'm actually going to grab that T30 fastener from earlier, or I'll grab a lug and just send one into the brake rotor, just so that when I remove the bracket, the rotor doesn't fall on me. So for the bottom fastener, I've got a good amount of clearance. So I'm going to use this wrench to give me the leverage I need. And then the ratcheting head to save me some time. That's nice and loose. I'm going to break this one free before I continue working. All right, so I'm in here with a shallow 21. Feels like it's finger tight now, so I'm just going to try to remove it with just the socket. What you'll notice is the rotor was putting a little bit of sideways pressure on the caliper bracket, making it a little bit harder for me to remove the bolt, so I'm just centering the rotor to make my life a little bit easier. Ideally, you either send the lug in all the way or retain it with the T30, so you're not doing this dance that I'm doing right now. There we are, bracket's off. This is the surface that the brake pads are going to slide in, so I'm going to take some time to clean that up. Really doesn't look too bad, and I'm going to take some time to clean it up before we put it back on the vehicle. And now I'm just going to remove that lug that I put in, remove the rotor. All right, everyone, so at the beginning of the video, I mentioned one of the reasons we're changing the rotor is because we noticed there's an aftermarket product on the car, we don't know the history, and it's been sitting for some time. So now I'm going to show you some of the differences with an aftermarket product versus the genuine Mercedes rotor that we're going to put on the vehicle today. For starters, the genuine rotor is a two-piece design. The aftermarket is a one-piece design. What the two-piece design allows Mercedes to do in this instance is construct a rotor that is lighter, in this case about 3.5 pounds per side lighter than the aftermarket product. One of the ways that they do this is by engineering this really thin, we'll call it a sheet steel, this really thin hub. This hub is about 2.5 millimeters in thickness compared to the 5 or more millimeters of thickness on the aftermarket part. So it's almost as if you've installed a wheel spacer on your vehicle, although you haven't, and you're still using the factory lugs. So not an ideal situation. Additionally, the factory rotors have the wear indicators that I mentioned, and the aftermarket ones don't. So you can very quickly assess the remaining life of your rotor looking at the wear indicators. You really can't do that with the aftermarket product. So those are a couple of reasons why we're going to be using and continuing to use the genuine rotor on this application until something is available from an OE supplier that's comparable in design and quality. All right, so we're preparing the caliper bracket surface to accept the new brake pads. Things we want to check for, make sure the sliding pins are still slidey. If they aren't, pop them off, clean them up, re-grease them. In this case, they are moving perfectly. And then we're going to clean the sliding surfaces that the brake pads ride in. You'll notice I threw the mask back on because I really don't want to breathe in this dirt. This is going to be iron from the rotor. This is going to be material from the brake pad. It's all stuff you don't want to be breathing in if you can avoid it. All right, that's nice and clean. When we do put it back on the car, TRW has supplied us with some lubricant, and we are going to apply some of that to the sliding surfaces. Now I'm going to go over to the wheel hub, clean that up as well. This is the wheel hub that I was referring to. The rotor is going to ride on this surface, this one, and where the set screw attaches right here, there's a raised area that it will ride on as well. So, just cleaning up the surface, very similar to what you saw me do with the caliper bracket. You can make quick work of this if you have a soft bristle wire brush on a drill. I'm just doing this by hand. All right, so that's cleaned up. Now we can put the new components on. Next thing we're going to do is retract the caliper piston so that we can install the pads. Perfect time to inspect the boot around the piston, make sure that it's not ripped or damaged in any way. If it is, what will generally happen is you'll see some wetness, and when it is damaged, it will allow the outside environment into the bore for the piston. So it will make quick work of scoring the bore. It might allow the outside environment to get into the area behind the piston where you have the hydraulic fluid. So you definitely want to take care of this as soon as you see there's an issue, either by using a caliper rebuild kit or purchasing a fresh caliper and installing it. So this spreader that I'm using to retract the piston is normally designed for a multi-piston caliper. In this case, this is just a single piston sliding caliper. So I'm maxed out. What I'm going to do is grab one of my old brake pads and put it on this surface, and that will give me enough working surface to spread my pad spreader. All right, so now I've got more room to retract the piston. There we are. So now that piston's all the way in the bore of the caliper, we'll be able to install the new pads with no issues. All right, so we've got our new rotor, and when we're handling the rotor, we're handling it by the edges, similar to the guidance that's provided from Mercedes on how you handle these two-piece rotors. And then I'm just sending the set screw in so that this guy doesn't move around while we're working. All right, what I was referring to in terms of handling it, as you can see, this is, instead of a traditional two-piece design where the hub is bolted to the friction, this is kind of slotted in, it's geared in. So because of that, Mercedes recommends that you handle the rotor from the friction and don't lift it from the hub area. All right, so now I'm putting in the caliper bracket. All right, so that one just caught, and now I'll tack in the upper one. Just kind of moving the bracket back and forth to feel where, when the screw sits in the bracket, and then start threading it in. Now we've got our ratcheting wrench just to save us some time. All right, that's snug. That's snug. I'll get the correct torque value and then we'll torque it with the wrench. Just torquing that to spec. The spec for that bolt is 120 Newton meters. All right, so now I'm going to install our pad wear sensor on our brake pad in preparation to install the pad onto the bracket. So there's a locating pin on the wear sensor. There's a locating hole that's drilled into the brake pad, and you're just lining everything up and snapping it in place. That's all. All right, next thing I'm going to do to prepare the pads, just the surfaces where the pad is going to be riding on the bracket. Just throwing a little lube on there, being careful not to get any of it on the rotor. So it's going to slide in here, in here, and in here. Not going too crazy. This will help typically reduce noise, especially at really cold temperatures, first couple of stops, things like that. All right, we're going to put the pad in the caliper bracket. That's in. Pad with the sensor, be sure to put it on the inboard side. Bit of difficulty sliding in there. The portion of the spring that bends, just lead that in first, and once that's in, then you can rotate the pad into the bracket. A little hard to show, but that's what I did to get it in. Now we're going to make sure our wear sensor lead goes through the hole in the body of the caliper, like that. And then we're just going to tack our screws in place. That's the first one. There we are. There we are. I'm going to connect my pad wear sensor first, the sensor lead, and then I will snug the bracket up. It's just going to be a little bit easier than attempting to do it in that space when everything is buttoned up. So just pushing that all the way in. And tightening that down. That was an E10 fastener. This is one of those deals where snug is good enough. There we are, that's snug. All right, everyone, we just wrapped up the brake job on this 2015 Mercedes C300, and as you can see, wasn't that difficult. Doesn't require any special tools, didn't take that much time to do as well. One pointer, when you're installing the brake pad wear sensor, make sure you're installing it on the inboard side, not on the outboard side of the brake caliper. Of course, if you have any questions at all, be sure to leave them in the comments below, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.